Welcome to the Metabolic Link, a medical and science-focused podcast that explores the common thread of metabolism in health and disease. This is where science meets society. Welcome back to the Metabolic Link podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Field, and I'm the co-founder of Metabolic Health Initiative, which is the overarching organization to Metabolic Health Summit, the scientific conference, to the medical education platform, the Metabolic Initiative, and to this podcast right here, the Metabolic Link. And I am so excited that you're here with me today because we've got a really special guest, Dr. Dale Bredesen. Did you know that more than 7 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's? And by 2050, that number is expected to double to nearly 13 million people. What's even more sobering is that over 45 million of us are going to develop Alzheimer's sometime during our lifetime, making it one of the most urgent public health crises of our time. Alzheimer's is also the now third leading cause of death in the United States, and it's such a significant problem. It affects so many of us, so many of our loved ones. It's really devastating disease. And despite decades of research, billions of dollars invested, current treatments have really yielded very modest results on a good day. In fact, recent drug trials have only shown a slowing of cognitive decline by about 25 to 30%. I'm not talking about reversal, sure, not talking about prevention. Most treatments are actually focused on monotherapies, one drug for one presumed cause. But Dr. Dale Bredesen has shown this approach is unfortunately fundamentally flawed. Alzheimer's, he says, is not caused by one thing, and it won't be solved by a single pill. So, as I mentioned, my guest today is Dr. Dale Bredesen. He's a neurologist, a researcher, a best-selling author who has literally spent the last 30 years developing an incredible systems-based approach and protocol to fighting Alzheimer's. And he's seeing the most unbelievable results. He's not just slowing cognitive decline, but actually reversing it. He's the creator of the ReCODE Protocol and the author of The End of Alzheimer's, The First Survivors of Alzheimer's, and most recently, The Ageless Brain. And I am thrilled to also mention, before you dive into this episode, that he's going to be joining us for a live Q&A on September 4th at 9 a.m. PT, 12 p.m. ET on our medical education platform, the Metabolic Initiative. You can sign up for a free day trial. Try it for free. Check out our hundreds of other videos on metabolic health and therapy. But then you'll have an opportunity to also ask Dr. Bredesen your questions after watching this episode, because I don't know about you, but after I did this interview, I had literally 30 to 100 more questions for him. So I hope you'll join us. Head on over to membership.metabolicinitiative.com/Bredesen, Bredesen. That's membership.metabolicinitiative.com/Bredesen to sign up for that live Q&A. But in the meantime, I really hope you enjoy listening to this episode with the incredible Dr. Dale Bredesen. Dr. Bredesen, thank you so much for joining me once again. Wonderful to see you, and such a big fan of your work and everything that you're doing in the world to help people with Alzheimer's and just in really battling against cognitive decline. So thank you for coming on the Metabolic Link.
Yeah, thanks so much, Victoria. Always great to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to diving to today's conversation. There's a lot to cover. We'll kind of get started, I think, by providing people with an idea around sort of the scope of the problem. Let's kind of talk about how there's more than 7 million Americans now living with Alzheimer's. But globally, I think it's something like 55 million plus Americans are living with dementia. Yet you've said Alzheimer's should and hopefully shall be a rare disease. So what is keeping us from this reality? And why are we just so plagued with such a terrible situation when it comes to cognitive decline in the world?
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's very much, certainly a lot of overlap with these same reasons that we have 100 million Americans with metabolic syndrome. Because we're doing the wrong things, we're living the wrong way, we're doing things that we're basically assume. Okay, we assume that ultra-processed food is no worse. We assume that living in houses with mycotoxins is not a big problem. We assume all these things, and unfortunately, these assumptions over the decades have come back to haunt us. And we now know that many of these things that we're doing are not the optimal thing. So what's interesting to me, though, we came from a completely different angle. We knew nothing of this. We didn't think this was an issue. We came straight from the test tube from 30 years in the lab, just looking at the molecular species that drive the neurodegenerative process. Why do you get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS? I mean, this has been the area, as you know, of greatest therapeutic failure. We don't have things for Alzheimer's, or we haven't in the past. Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia, PSP, CBD, just go right down the list, ALS, all these things. And so we wanted to know, why is that? And so we looked at what is the fundamental nature of these diseases. And what we realized after all the research, looking at all these molecular species interacting with each other, what happens inside the cells, how do they signal cell death, all these things, what we found is that these are all network insufficiencies. So what's really interesting is, as we evolved, of course, as you know, the selection is always for performance over durability. You don't need to live forever, but you need to be able to compete with your neighbors for for being a survivor, for survival. So, if the ones who the ones who selected for durability were killed by the ones who selected for performance. So what's amazing, you have an amazing performing brain. You can store more in your brain than over 2,000 home computers. But that's the system that fails in Alzheimer's. Now, you also have the ability to amplify, in terms of energetics, to amplify outcomes, so outputs, so that you have, for example, from a thought to maximal muscle contraction is an amplification that's greater than what you get when you stomp on your accelerator in your car. It's an incredible system, but that one fails in ALS. Then you've got a beautiful motor modulatory system. And look at what Simone Biles can do. It's incredible. I mean, look at what great pianists can do and violinists. I mean, the motor modulation that humans have is truly remarkable. That's the one that fails in Parkinson's disease. So what we see is that each of these things, you have an Achilles heel or heels because of this evolutionary system and evolutionary selection. And so now what happens is, if your supply is overridden by your demand, you must downsize. And so there are so many things. And so we can now start to look for each of these diseases at what is failing. And of course, in Alzheimer's, there are three big ones. First one is energetics. And that is your metabolic support, your blood flow, your oxygen saturation, which is why so many people with sleep apnea are at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. It's your mitochondrial function, all those things that we think about metabolically. Then it's inflammation, all these different chronic infections, leaky gut, poor oral microbiome, rhinosinal microbiomes, all of these things. And in fact, when you look at the brain microbiome, which was surprising that the brain actually has a normal microbiome, as I was always taught in medical school 50 years ago, that this was actually a sterile organ. Well, that's turned out to be wrong. And where are these organisms coming from? They're mostly oral organisms. Wow. And so, each of these things, and I should say the third issue is toxicity, and that's inorganics, organics, and biotoxins. And then the three moderate ones are stress. And that was surprising to me. As a scientist, I thought, yeah, we're all under stress, so what? Turns out that is a common player in cognitive decline. In fact, you could even follow the receptors within the brain that are associated with corticotropin releasing factor. They are associated with Alzheimer's disease. And then you have neurotrophic activity, and that's your hormones and your nutrients and your growth factors. And then finally, neurotransmission. You've got to have acetylcholine to make memories. And so if you look at those six players, they are the ones that are determining, do we have enough support, do we not? And everybody who's on the wrong side of this has got too big of a demand because of things like inflammation and toxicity, and too small of a supply because of energetics and things like that. So all we're saying is, fine, we can identify now what's causing that. We can correct that. And we're seeing again and again and again, including in our current trial, just dramatic improvements. And we've just recently published a paper showing over a decade of sustained improvement in people with cognitive decline. So absolutely what you said is true. Cognitive decline should be much less common than it is currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's really interesting because I think Alzheimer's is kind of it's resembling type 2 diabetes in a way where we can actually detect it way early on than we were before, right? With type 2 diabetes, you understand that there's insulin resistance happening. Now we have some biomarkers that I know we're going to get into with you today, where you can start to see what's happening. You can start to see this very, very, very early on, maybe even before you get like an MCI diagnosis, right? Your mild cognitive impairment. So this is something that we can really do a lot about very early on, which I know you talk a lot about. We'll get into your protocol even further, which I'm really looking forward to. But it's one of the wild things to me is that mild cognitive impairment is considered this sort of mild issue. It's kind of seen as like, oh, okay, well, this is what's happening. Go ahead and go about your life. There's nothing really we can do right now, but just come back. And they're kind of basically letting people go to sort of wait for Alzheimer's to essentially develop in some ways. In my mind anyway. But you've said many times that this is actually late stage Alzheimer's. So we have like a window of opportunity way ahead of MCI. So talk a little bit about that, the whole concept of waiting until symptoms, get worse and why that might be such a dangerous approach.
Such a good point. And the reality is virtually everything is being done wrong in this field because there has been nothing that has been helpful before. But now we want to know earlier. People, don't want to use the A word. So when you develop cognitive decline, and Alzheimer's is the most common reason, it represents about 60% of dementias. So it's the common one. So you go through 4 phases. So at the beginning, you have a phase where you are asymptomatic, but you can already show changes on spinal fluid, PET scan. But who wants a spinal tap every couple of years, right? So the great news, as you mentioned, you now have blood-based biomarkers. p-tau 217, by the way, soon a new one called super p-tau, which is even better. So this is like when people first started looking at insulin resistance. So they can really pick up diabetes before you ever have full-on diabetes. I like the idea, because of what happened with diabetes, of calling these pre-Alzheimer's. The semantic issue is Alzheimer's is a pathology. So you have the pathology even at the beginning, but it's also been used as a dementia term. So people say, oh my God, I have Alzheimer's. Well, no, you have the beginning of the pathology, but you don't have to get symptoms for years. So the second phase is called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. By definition, that means you notice some changes, but you're still able to score normally on cognitive tests. We see it all the time. It lasts about 10 years on average. So as you said, the window is huge. And these people in these first 2 phases are easy to treat. They come back completely. They sustain their improvement. So that's when you want to get in. Now, as you mentioned, the third one is called MCI. By definition, mild cognitive impairment means you're now testing abnormally on cognitive tests, but you still have your activities of daily living. You can still balance your checkbook, drive your car, dress yourself, do all those things. But those people, 5 to 10% each year, go on to dementia. And by definition, that means that you now have started to lose your activities of daily living. And it gets progressively harder to get full improvement as you go along. So this is why we encourage people, please, if you're 35 or over, please get what we call brain scan. Look at, is your p-tau slightly high? You don't have to worry about it if it is. We just have to get on in a program to make sure it's improved. And often it's going to be because you have some degree of insulin resistance and you have some degree of metabolic syndrome, which increases your risk for Alzheimer's dramatically. It's one of the most common risk factors and contributors. Also good to know your genetic background. There are 75 million Americans with a single copy of ApoE4. That increases your lifetime risk from 9%, which is the ApoE4 negatives, to 30%. And if you have two copies, that's 7 million Americans, your risk is 90%. So don't worry about it. Find out, get on optimal prevention or earliest treatment, and you're going to do very, very well. So we see it again and again. And as I mentioned, ongoing trial, just dramatic improvements, statistically significant improvements. This will be completed at the end of October. So I'm very enthusiastic about that.
Did you know that the average home has more than 100 toxic chemicals under one roof? I'm talking about things like personal care products, cleaners especially, and even air fresheners and candles too. Research actually shows that many of these chemicals, like phthalates, 1,4-dioxane, can contribute to respiratory issues, skin irritation, hormone disruption, and completely negatively impact your metabolic health, which is what you're trying to avoid. And this is especially true in kids, pregnant women, and people with sensitivities. That's why I'm completely obsessed with Branch Basics and have been for more than 5 years. It has literally changed the way I clean, think about cleaning, and it could not be simpler. And it actually works. You just take this concentrate right here. They send this to you along with 3 spray bottles. You can get ones in glass, which I love. There's 3 of them. There's one for simple jobs like, windows and glass. This is that one right here. And then there's another for all purpose, and then sort of a green color. And then there's one that's colored red that you use for tougher jobs like bathrooms. And you simply fill it up to the line on the side, fill it with water, and you're done. It's so easy. And then you've got cleaning products, and then you simply just need to order this whenever you're out of your cleaning products, and then you refill your bottle. So less waste, right? It's just a win-win all around. And the beautiful part is it works so well. I also have their dishwasher tablets right here that are plastic free, which I love. In addition to that, I use their laundry detergent, literally like everything in my house that you could clean. I use Branch Basics. My husband even uses Branch Basics to clean his smoker. Yes, it's that good. I'm so excited to be sharing this brand with you. Branch Basics is Made Safe certified, Leaping Bunny certified, and completely transparent. They list every single simple ingredient on their bottle, so you know exactly what you're getting, exactly what you're bringing into your home. There's no dyes, no fragrances, no harmful chemicals, just plant and mineral-based formulas that actually work and support a healthy home and environment so you can help optimize your metabolic health, your family's metabolic health, and your overall wellness, right? That's what we're all after. So really switching out your cleaning products is critical in the overall picture of health. Protect your home, protect your family from unnecessary chemicals with simple swaps like Branch Basics. Head on over to branchbasics.com/metabolic link for 15% off your premium starter kit. That's branchbasics.com/metabolic link for 15% off your premium starter kit. I know you're going to love these products just as much as I do. And I've genuinely used them for years now, even before they were a sponsor of this podcast. So I highly recommend checking them out. Clean smarter, live healthier. You and your family deserve it. Now back to our episode. Yeah, I would love to maybe share what you can with, I know, this randomized control trial that you're conducting right now. We briefly spoke about it offline. I would love to hear a little bit more about that and sort of what you're seeing, who's in the study. Share what you can with us, and we're really looking forward to that being published for sure.
Yeah, I am as well. And there should be a preprint out by the end of this year. The study is going to complete on October 31st. And so we'll be able to put all the data together. Then we'll have a larger peer-reviewed paper next year in 2026. But this is a trial it's a personalized precision medicine approach, which we pioneered back in 2014, published the first examples, and those were just anecdotes. We published more in 2016 and 2018. Then we did a proof of concept trial, these are all freely available online, which was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2022. Actually, Dr. Heather Sanderson did a confirmatory trial, another trial very similar, got very similar results, and published hers as well. Again, this is all out there. And now then we've moved on to a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard. You kind of need to take one step at a time to show that, yes, this really works. And so this is what we're in the middle of now. And I'm actually really honored to be working with three physicians in the first trial, now 6 physicians in this trial. And as Dr. Kat Toops, Dr. Anne Hathaway, Dr. Christine Burke, Dr. Nate Bergman, Dr. Craig Tanio, and Dr. David Haas. And so really excited to be working with them, and they're doing a great job. And so we're looking at all of these contributors to cognitive decline, exactly what you'd want to do to see what's driving this. And therefore, each person's treatment plan is going to be slightly different based on what's driving their problem. Some of these people, they have recurrent outbreaks of herpes simplex. That has been associated with increased risk. And in fact, the herpes simplex has been found in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's more commonly. Now, to be fair, it's a very common virus, as you know, but it is more associated with Alzheimer's. This is the work of Professor Ruth Itzhaki from the UK over her whole career. So these things come back again and again. There are changes, P. gingivalis, T. denticola, F-nucleatomol from the oral microbiome that can be drivers. So we see these sorts of things again and again. And by the way, of course, one of the things that's coming up in the last few years is microplastics. We now know they do concentrate in the brain more than the liver, more than the kidney. They are associated with cognitive decline. What we don't know yet is, are they causing the decline? Are they a result of the decline? Or is it some of both? But we do know that they're certainly associated.
Yeah. Really exciting research that you're going to be coming out with. I'm really looking forward to reading more about that. I know you've shared some information, and it's very exciting that this will be out in the world soon. I want to bounce back to p-tau 217 and some of the blood biomarkers, and kind of talk a little bit about early detection, because you mentioned 35 and above, maybe looking at this marker. You also have mentioned in other interviews, and I know it's available. You can get this blood test online, but p-tau 217, GFAP, and NFL. Do you recommend typically, without giving anybody medical advice, but what testing, I guess, in that regard and screening, should we all be getting this, after 35, 40, 50? What does it look like? What do you suggest for people wanting to be super proactive about cognitive decline?
It's so important, just like knowing your cholesterol or your blood pressure, you want to know where you stand. And what we recommend is start at 35 and every 5 years. So you don't need to get it often. Every 5 years, twice a decade, you know where you stand. When you hit 60, you want to do it every 2 years. So I'm in my mid-70s now. I had my test a couple of weeks ago. I'm very happy to see that my numbers are in line. I will check it again in 2 years. The good news is, if you're seeing them bumping up, just like seeing your hemoglobin A1C bumping up, no problem. You're going to go on an appropriate program to change that. Now, just in the last couple of years, 2 papers have come out that are concerning. And that what they showed is that you can pick up changes in the brain in people in their 20s. Even though you're not getting a diagnosis typically of Alzheimer's until your 60s, 70s, although we are seeing a lot more people in their early 50s now than we ever did before. So there are changes, and this has been published by epidemiologists. The greatest increases year over year are turning out to be in the people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Really surprising. So it's not something to be scared about, because there's something we can do about it, but it's something to be active about. And so, yes, we recommend that everybody, and we have collaborated with the team that has the most sensitive assay, and this is ReCODE. And what we use then is called brain scan. So it's those 3 things that you mentioned. It's p-tau 217, and by the way, the most sensitive one. One of the patients recently went to another group and got a p-tau, and they said, well, we can't even find any. And he said, well, how come the ReCODE one showed me my p-tau? And they said, yeah, theirs is more sensitive than ours. So they have the most sensitive one. They use a specific type of assay called single molecule assay, Simoa, and a special approach, which is ALTS-PATH, to get these very sensitive results. So we recommend that starting at 35, you find out these 3. p-tau 217 is very specific for changes in the brain that are associated with Alzheimer's down the way.
Mm.
And GFAP is a complementary test because it's indicating inflammation and attempted repair within your brain. So it's an early marker, but it's not specific for Alzheimer's. It could be that you had a car accident. It could be that you played a lot of football. It could be that you have some vascular disease, frontotemporal dementia. Very complementary. So those two together give you a lot of information. And then the third one is NFL. That gives you a different piece of information, which is there any damage to neurons ongoing? So for example, someone is high in all three, that says they have relatively active Alzheimer's. Get in there, get on an optimal protocol, keep tweaking. On the other hand, what we see all the time, high p-tau, low GFAP, low NFL, that's relatively quiescent Alzheimer's. You're likely to have a slower path, but still you want to get on active treatment. Now we see the opposite. We see people who have high GFAP and NFL and low p-tau. Those people typically have another process like frontotemporal dementia or something like that. So the good news is we can really get a lot of information, and actually the brain scan that I mentioned gives you a report, and you can actually do it directly so that you don't have to have a separate doctor visit. You just go on getabrainscan.com and you can actually get this done. So it's something that we should all know to give ourselves the best long-term success. And this is actually why I wrote The Ageless Brain. It was all about how can we all have a brain span that is equal to our lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for going through those tests. One question that popped into my mind is, does it matter the timing of them in terms of, I know you mentioned one of them can kind of be influenced by maybe like some kind of traumatic brain injuries along the way or what have you, but what about severe stress, maybe severe sleep deprivation, such as myself, I have a little toddler, things along those lines that you want to kind of be mindful of when you actually go get these tests done. Can that kind of influence, maybe say you lose a loved one or something like that, might not be the best time when you're going through immense stress to get these markers done. Is there a timing difference in your opinion?
It's a great point. For the most part, they're not very affected by just stress. There can be some bump in these from COVID and from other pro-inflammatory things, just as you might imagine, things that contribute. So yes, stress can have a small impact. And yeah, you would want to do it if you're under massive stress and your numbers have bumped a little. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but I would try to work on getting the stress down because that affects so many other things as well.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Pressure, all that. So there are small impacts, but in general, what's really interesting about tau is this thing is like if you go back to the Revolutionary War, the Minutemen, they could be blacksmiths during the day or farmers or what have you, but with a minute's notice, they pick up the musket. Now they're soldiers. That's what tau does. So tau is this beautiful molecule that is a stabilizing bolt on your microtubules. So it is bolting your microtubules and making it so when you put out processes, they're stable. However, when things go bad, when you see this change, and what we see in signaling is a change from connection to protection. You're literally saying, uh-oh, I've got problems. I've got oral microbiome sitting here now. I've got P. gingivalis or herpes simplex or what have you. So I have to change my resources from connection to protection, and a whole host of things. It's literally like going from sleep to wake. A whole host of things change. And one of the things is that your tau becomes phosphorylated at multiple sites. That changes its charge and changes its shape. It pops off the microtubules, and now it becomes an antimicrobial protein. It literally is now going around killing microbes. So it's a beautiful system where you've got, I'm building things. Uh-oh, wait a minute. I'm protecting what I've already built. Now, of course, when it pops off, the neurites are collapsing. So what you're measuring with that phospho-tau, you're measuring, is your brain in a mode of pulling back or is in a mode of going forward? And the good news is, if it's in a mode of pulling back, it takes a while before you have significant symptoms. So you've got some time to jump in there and improve things. But that's the way this works. And it's so, yes, there are some minor changes, but in general, it's a very good, those three together are a very good indication of where your brain stands.
Yeah. Wow. That's really exciting. Those tests are available for sure. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're someone who takes your health very seriously. And chances are you're probably someone who also loves data to guide your decisions. I know I do. Whether you're hitting a wall with your health goals, or maybe you just feel off, maybe you're more tired than normal, you've got unexplained gut issues, you're just struggling to focus, Genova Connect can help. They offer a range of advanced at-home diagnostic tests that go far beyond the basics, including panels for hormones, nutrients, metabolism, gut health, and more. The results give you a personalized snapshot of how your body is functioning, so you're no longer just guessing. And the test results are really unbelievable in terms of all the data points they give you. It's like nothing I've ever seen, really. I've used their Metabolomics Plus and their GI effects test personally, and they are just unbelievable in terms of the nutrient profile that you get with Metabolomics Plus, and then the information on your gut microbiome with GI effects. Honestly, was invaluable. It was amazing because I had a chronic illness for a couple of years, and my physician and I were just kind of scratching our heads trying to figure out how to navigate out of it. And those two tests really gave me so much information as to what might have been going on. And they helped me a ton in getting back to my normal self and optimizing metabolic health again. So highly recommend you check them out. Genova Connect is offering 15% off any test kit with code Metabolic Link. Just head to gdx.net/themetabolic-link and use the code Metabolic Link at checkout. That's gdx.net/themetabolic-link. Use code Metabolic Link at checkout. Now back to our episode. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into your protocol that you've developed, ReCODE, and really kind of talk more about how you've been able to target the root cause of cognitive decline here, and what you've seen along the way with different types of sort of Alzheimer's, right? This is not just like there's a reason this monotherapeutic approach has kind of failed us, because we're not taking into consideration that Alzheimer's can kind of potentially come about for various reasons. So please share a little bit more about ReCODE and how that approach has really enabled you to reverse this.
Yeah, and so, this came, as I said, just straight out of the test tube. We were looking at what are the molecules that drive all this, and it became clear that energetics are important. All the things we talked about, energetics and inflammation and those sorts of things. So it became clear that this insufficiency, you've got a lower supply and a higher demand. So all we're doing is looking at what are all the things that are in your supply side and in your demand side. And we then want to lower the demand, and we want to raise the supply. So the way we do this is straightforward. And we realize that, when we started this, we didn't know much about functional medicine. And then, of course, I met Jeffrey Bland. Actually, Jeffrey came to the Buck Institute at one point for a visit, and we started talking about all this and realizing that really the molecular side and the nutritional and functional side really fit together so beautifully. And this is the future of chronic illness treatment, to look at these drivers rather than just this, monotherapy. I'm going to give you one drug and it's going to fix this entire network. I mean, that's really a kind of a naive idea, which is not to say drugs can't be helpful. Yes, they're great. I always tell people, imagine 36 holes in your roof. A drug is a fantastic patch for one hole, but you still have 35 holes left. You got to look at, and we said 36 because when we first looked at the Alzheimer mechanisms, we came up with 36. We know there are a few more now, but it's not thousands, it's dozens. So what we do is 7 basics and 2 specifics, straightforward. So the 7 basics are, you need to have a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. And having that metabolic flexibility is arguably the most important thing of all. Because when we see people with cognitive decline, they have lost both the ability to utilize glucose appropriately and the ability to make ketones. So they're not metabolically flexible. Usually we're like a Prius, as you know. You can use glucose, you can use ketones. But when you become insulin resistant, you lose the ability to use glucose. And in fact, that is the PET scan signature of Alzheimer's.
Right.
reduced glucose utilization in the temporal and parietal lobes. So
Yeah.
there you go. They're not using the glucose appropriately. But because you now ramp up your insulin, insulin prevents you from making ketones.
Mm.
So these are brain engines that are literally sputtering. So we want to get them fuel immediately. So we often will use some exogenous ketones just for the first month or two while we get people in. And again, this is also why we have to be careful with people who are frail. You can hurt them by trying to drive them into this metabolic flexibility too quickly. Get them some support, then slowly get them into a metabolic flexible state. So, second one's exercise. Things like HIIT have been shown to reduce risk for cognitive decline. They're important. You need the blood flow. You need the insulin sensitivity that better musculature creates, for example. Sleep, 4 targets in sleep, at least 7 hours per night, at
Mm.
least 90 minutes of REM, at least 60 minutes of deep sleep, and at least an SpO2, an oxygen saturation of 94%. If you hit those 4 parameters, you're doing great. But many people aren't, and it's hurting their brains, especially the
Yeah.
ones with sleep apnea. So, wearables are really helpful for these complex chronic illnesses like Alzheimer's disease and like type 2 diabetes. So then the fourth one is stress. And as you mentioned before, stress is an issue, no question about it. Again, I used to think as a scientist, this was not a big deal. I was wrong. It's turned out to be very important for so many different things.
Yeah.
And then even when we were looking for drugs that target various pieces of Alzheimer's, it turns out that the corticotropin releasing factor receptor 1 is one of the targets. So that's the fourth thing. The fifth one is brain training. Sixth is detox. And the seventh one is some targeted supplements. So there are things like resolvins, like omega-3s, like vitamin D, like for people who are low in magnesium, which we see all the time, having appropriate magnesium glycinate or magnesium threonate or things like that. So those are the 7 basics that we can all do. Then there are the 2 specifics. You want to look at all the infections. There are chronic infections that many of us don't realize we have. And so we're walking around with things like a tick-borne illness. We see it all the time. Borrelia, Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma. A friend of mine contacted me a few years ago and said, I'm clearly having some cognitive issues. I can't, even read books anymore. Something's wrong here. So, long story short, it turns out this guy had multiple tick-borne illnesses. Okay, so you gotta get rid of those. You often don't know that you have them, and they are creating this long-term state of inflammation. And what's interesting, you're actually making the amyloid that we vilified in Alzheimer's because it is surrounding these things, sequestering them and killing them. We now believe it is a new component of the immune system. Before the adaptive, you had the innate, and our argument is before the innate, you have a pre-inflammatory immune component, which is what amyloid is all about. You can have amyloid in your brain for 20, 30 years without having problems until you have that next stage where you have inflammation. So it's various infections, and then the other one is toxicity. And those, as I mentioned, it's the inorganics, the organics, the biotoxins, whether it's from things like mercury, air pollution. There's a lot now on air pollution. The fires that so many people have been exposed to, that is a concern. When the World Trade Center happened way back in 2001, the people who were exposed at that time have a very, very high dementia probability. They ended up by about 10 years later, close to 50% of these were actually developing dementia. So getting exposed to toxins, because of course from the World Trade Center there were multiple biotoxins and organics and inorganics. I mean, it was horrible, as you know.
Yeah.
So all these sorts of things, the anesthetic agents, people who are under general anesthesia for a long time are at increased risk for cognitive decline. What we're seeing now commonly is people who've had COVID, and that's already been published epidemiologically. People who've had COVID within the next year have an increased risk for cognitive decline. So again, we need to optimize these things. If you've had COVID, make sure you don't have long COVID. Dr. Patrick Hanaway and the group have developed wonderful treatments for long COVID.
Yeah.
So all of these things are important to address. Now, when you address those things, so again, it's going to be a little different for each person, you see just dramatic and unprecedented improvements and sustained improvements, which really tell us, yes, you are addressing the things that are actually driving the decline.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear in patients that you've obviously shared and published in your book and in general stories around patients who have seen just remarkable results, just complete reversal in some cases. What happens with the patients where they maybe don't respond as well? You know, what have you learned from those patients?
That's a great point. So what we found is if you look at the ones who respond the best and they respond the least, some of the things are obvious, some of them are less obvious.
Mm.
So let's start with the ones who responded really well. They're the ones who started early, of no surprise. It's easier, it's more complete, it's more sustained. The people who really are compliant with the protocol, who actually do, is one of the things I've run into from day one, way back in 2012.
Oh.
Patient zero, who, by the way, is still doing well at 81 now, 13 years on the protocol. She is in the middle of walking from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean,
Oh my
San
gosh.
Diego to St. Augustine. You can see her online at judywalks.com. Her name is
Oh,
Judy.
cool. Oh, that's amazing.
Amazing story. Yeah,
I've read about her, yeah, in your books.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
she's
amazing.
amazing. Those people, and she was very diligent about getting the right things and keeping optimizing. So, okay, address the basics, keep looking. If something's not working, okay, you want to keep looking. Is there something that's been missed? Keep optimizing. We have people at the other end who are like, they're acting like, yeah, we're doing all this stuff, but I say, okay, what was your ketone level, yesterday? Well, we're not doing that part. Well, okay, then you're not doing the things that are helping your brain. Okay, what was your sleep last night? How much REM did you have last night? Well, we're not checking that. Okay, so then you're not doing the things that are actually going to help. And people don't believe that something as simple as your oxygen saturation at night really means anything for your brain health. But I can tell you, after 30 years studying neurons in a dish, it does matter. So you do want to optimize those things. And then people who have good teams. So we have some teams where almost everybody's getting better, and some teams where almost nobody is getting better. They don't seem to be as experienced, as expert. They don't seem to be able to get the psychology to get these people to do the right things. They're not digging deep to see what's causing the problem. All of those sorts of things. The ones who do the worst are the ones, of course, who've had symptoms for many, many years. Although we just had another guy yesterday, 10 years of symptoms, and he's responded very well. So yes, it makes sense. Any time can be helpful. We've had people who go from MoCA scores of 0 to 9. Now, 9 is not a very high MoCA score. 0 to 30 is the scale, but it is a huge difference functionally. They can speak better. They can recognize their family again. They can become continent. So we have one person, as long as they're on the protocol, they're continent. And when they go off the protocol, they're incontinent. I mean, so there are many functional improvements that can occur, even if you're not going to get all the way back to normal. I would love to see during my lifetime, we take someone from 0 to perfect 30. We haven't seen it yet. We have seen people go from 18 is significant dementia, all the way to 30, which is great to see. But we haven't seen anyone go from 0 to 30. What will it take? Will it be more intranasal stem cells? Will it be trophic factors? We don't know yet, but that's the idea. So the ones who don't do well, working with a poor team. So when you're going to work with someone, ask them, can you let me talk to someone that you've made better? Look
Yeah.
at their track record, look at their publications, those sorts of things. Often the spouse or significant other will be very skeptical. I don't really believe. Yeah, don't bother to do this. Yeah. Compliance is the biggest issue, of course. People who have continued exposure, that's another one where they'll say, well, I'm doing this, but yeah, my ERMI score for my house was very high. I've got this tremendous response to these mycotoxins, and I can't move. That's tough. As
Or
anyone,
me being a mold test for those who haven't, yeah, is a mold test for the home.
for
Yeah.
anyone who deals with mycotoxins,
Right.
I was just at the meeting for Dr. Shoemaker, who's the father of this field of mycotoxin-related so-called CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And everyone says the same thing. If you can't get away from it, it's much tougher to treat it.
Yeah.
So being expert in doing these, and it really takes a village. It takes people who are good. Having a good health coach is a huge issue. The
Yeah.
good health coaches are getting fantastic results. The ones who aren't so good and aren't able to do the right things and get their patients better, of course, aren't getting the best outcomes. And then, of course, people where you don't find the drivers. When I see a report, we produce these reports for people which has a computer-based algorithm, because it used to take me 2.5 hours to go through all these different pieces and then put together, okay, here's what's going on with your neural network. Now, it's a few microseconds with a computer-based algorithm. So when you go through that, you can usually see, oh yeah, this is, and as you mentioned earlier, the types. We see people who are more inflammatory or
Right.
more toxic or more glycotoxic or more atrophic, those sorts of things, or more vascular. So
Yeah.
you can go through it and see, this is what's driving this person. When you go through the whole thing and there's nothing there, and you say, something is being missed. We have to find out what is driving this decline. But for the vast majority of people, you can see very clearly, yes. Now, you then going to look at, okay, do I need further testing to know more about which toxins, things like that? Great. But this gives you a very good background that you can say, okay, this is what's likely to be the problem. So that makes a huge difference between the great responders and the non-responders.
Living in Arizona, as I do, the sun is no joke. And if you're like me, your skin has probably been through some seriously sunny days this summer. And that means it's time to step up your skin game. Say goodbye to dryness and hello to glowing, radiant skin with the iRestore Illumina face mask. This dermatologist recommended mask uses 360 medical grade LEDs, double the power of most other masks, to target wrinkles, acne, sun damage, and inflammation. Red and infrared light boosts collagen, smooths fine lines, and improves blood flow, while blue light tackles blemishes and acne. And iRestore is one of the first masks that lets you use all three at the same time. It's basically like hitting the reset button for your skin. Honestly, it's so comfy, so easy to use. It comes like this. There's two little straps that go around, and I use it about 3 to 5 times a week in the evening. It's 10 minutes where it's like my time to meditate, to do breath work while I'm helping upgrade my skin at the same time. It's honestly the ultimate wellness hack for healthy, glowing skin. And it's so easy with this little battery pack. You can kind of walk all over the house and not even really notice that it's on. With the iRestore Illumina face mask, self-care is just as easy as it gets. There's no complicated skincare routines, just results. And for a limited time, our listeners are going to get a huge discount on the iRestore Illumina face mask with code Metabolic Link at iRestore.com/Metabolic Link. That's code Metabolic Link at iRestore.com/Metabolic Link. Thank you for that breakdown. It sounds like, support is a huge piece of this, support professionally, but also with family and whatnot. And you were talking about skeptics. I want to talk a little bit about this, because despite evidence that you've published, right, despite these amazing patient success stories, you're going through this randomized control trial right now. You've received pushback, right, from mainstream medicine, and continue to do so. Critics are saying, oh, that's too complex, or it's not scalable. I would love to hear your response to that, because I can only imagine what it's been like for you. For me, as somebody who has followed your work for quite some time, it's frustrating to see that, to hear that, to have conversations where you're trying to really provide. You've done such a phenomenal job, so much great work. So I'd love your thoughts on that topic.
And the data are undeniable. I mean, you just can't fake these data. The
Right.
people get better. By the way, their p-taus improve.
Wow.
By every criterion, their electrophysiology improves, their evoked responses improve, their quantitative EEGs improve, their MRIs improve, their
Wow.
volumetrics improve, their metabolic status improves. And their cognition improves. So, as a scientist, I was like, well, yeah, you can't deny it. Now, so on the front page of the New York Times, just a couple of weeks ago, was an article basically saying that what we're doing is quackery. They didn't use the term quackery, but they basically implied it,
Yeah.
So here's what happened with that. The backstory is quite interesting. 8 months ago, a reporter called me and said, we're going to do a story on what you guys are doing, on what you've published, et cetera. And I said, Okay. I said, look, if you're just going to do a hit piece to say, you're not interested in alternative medicine, this is a part of a bigger issue about Make America Healthy Again and RFK and,
Yeah.
and the Surgeon General nominee, who are
Mm.
all trying to do the right things for making things better. But it's become political instead of
Yeah.
data driven. So I said, look, if that's all you want to do, I don't have any interest in being interviewed. But I said, look, if you're willing to talk to about a dozen patients and doctors who have witnessed or experienced, so firsthand knowledge, seeing improvements, documenting them, objective improvements, so that you can really say, yes, here's what I found. I'm an investigative reporter. This works. I said, then I'm willing. I'll send you papers. I'll work with you. So I worked with her for 8 months. I sent her
Wow.
papers, data, contact information for all these people. She talked to the various doctors. She talked to the various patients. Everything's great. I thought, okay, she's going to write the truth. I was completely wrong. And so I learned an important lesson. I really thought that something called the New York Times, I really thought that the goal was accuracy.
Yeah.
I was wrong. And for the first time, I learned that the New York Times does not care about accuracy when it comes to Alzheimer's disease.
Mm.
This was specifically targeted. She literally ignored all of the data we gave her, all the
Wow.
papers, I even sent her the interim data on our trial. And I mean, it's just night and day. You can
Oh my
see
gosh.
huge differences. So she was aware of all that and suppressed all of it. She then went out and found one person who started during the late dementia. This person had been turned down for clinical trials because of being too advanced in her dementia.
Mm.
She went on the protocol for a couple of months and said, I'm not really that much better. I'm going to quit. That was it. And so that was used to say, this is ridiculous. They're making claims. It's not backed. What do you mean? It's backed up by everything we sent you.
Yeah.
So I
Uh-huh.
then had to go out and hire a lawyer. I found out quickly you have to demand a retraction within 20 days. Wow, that was I did not
Wow.
realize it was so quick. Everything in this case is stacked against the person and for the journal because, for example, I said, look, let's just subpoena the emails and text that went back and forth between the editor and the reporter. You're going to see things like, we're going to get these guys and all this sort of stuff. Said, no, you usually can't get those. Oh my gosh. So
Wow.
basically, you can get away with saying, even though there's a law against, quote, reckless disregard for the truth,
Oh
you
my
can get away with it 99% of the times. So I learned something about the New York Times, and I learned something about journalism and journalists.
oh
This
my
is a
gosh.
political issue currently. And the old thing about my mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts, that was very much there. So it was clear that the agenda for this piece was set before I was ever contacted.
Mm.
We're going to put down what they consider alternative, even though we have far better results than
Yeah.
any other approach.
Yeah.
Even though we have multiple publications, even though we have objective data, even though we have new clinical trial data, even though she talked to, a dozen different people who've seen this or experienced it, none of that was taken into account. And everything was about one person who started in the end stage and gave up after a few months. So
Ah.
it's sad to me, it's sad to see that that's what journalism is all about.
That's brutal to go through. I'm sorry you had to experience something like that. And that's kind of similar to what I'm talking about. Sounds like this might have been politically motivated. But even maybe ahead of that, it's been interesting to see, you're publishing things that provide a lot of hope, I think. I mean, if you look at current Alzheimer's drugs, I think maybe the best drug 20 to 30% of patients maybe might respond. And even then, they're not improving, they're not getting better, they're not reversing cognitive decline, right? So if you've got this protocol that are things that you can do at home, like it empowers the patient, it's mind blowing to me that there are physicians out there that are really pushing back and even publishing things around, the protocol to where the alternative, the other, there are no real viable, good options here, right? And you're publishing something that is helping so many people actually not just halt cognitive decline, but reverse it. So I was always very curious of your thoughts around that, because I can only imagine how frustrating it's been for you to continue to publish, like you said, evidence, MRI scans, all of these things that you can't deny that, but yet you're getting this pushback. So,
There's an old quote from Galileo, who was under house arrest in his era, and he said, "Surely it is harmful to humans to deny that which is already proved." We're proving that you can do this. Now, I have to say, there's one thing that I agree with. So there are doctors who are pushing back and saying, you're making claims that haven't yet been proven. Okay, we started from anecdotes, we went to proof of concept trial, now we're doing randomized controlled trial. So we have to prove it at each step. So we're gathering the information. We've got this current thing, we've got MRI data, epigenetic data, genetic data, on and on. We've got a lot of data to show this. But there's an important concept, which is compassionate use, which in medicine, when you have a disease for which there is nothing that's really helping people, then you don't have the same level. You don't wait the same. You don't wait and watch people die. You say, okay, we've got some anecdotal improvements. Let's offer this to people if they want. And of course, you go back to 1948, Dr. Dana-Farber, who is a pathologist, had an idea for something that might help childhood leukemia. At that time, there was nothing. Childhood leukemia was a death sentence. So he said, look, it looks like when people take folate, they actually get worse instead of better, because they would get anemic, of course. And so one of the things that they would get besides iron would be some folate. And it looked like those people did worse. So he said, let's actually try something that seems a little bit non-intuitive or anti-intuitive. Let's try an anti-folate, which is something called aminopterin. And they published 16 cases. So anecdotal studies, 16 cases, uncontrolled study. 10 of them had temporary remissions. That's all it was. But it was the beginning of what is now very successful treatment. Most people with childhood leukemia do very well now, thanks to that work way back when. So we've got far more data than Dr. Farber ever did. Again, we're dealing with a condition for which there has been nothing that makes you better sustainably. And so I think it's unfortunate that this whole concept of compassionate use has been pushed back by the people who are making money from the pharmaceuticals and things like that, which is unfortunate. In the long run, we want to bring these together. Best pharmaceutical targets with personalized precision medicine protocols. And I think that's the way for best outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to kind of end here, I would love to hear your thoughts around, for someone because this affects so many people, but for someone who's scared, overwhelmed by the thought of cognitive decline, or maybe they're even experiencing early symptoms, what would you say to them in terms of next steps and where to go from here?
Yeah, that I would say to them, things have changed dramatically in the last decade, much as they have for diabetes over the last several decades. So please don't wait. Get on active prevention or earliest treatment. And there absolutely is hope. And there was a nice rebuttal written by one of the patients who's done very well, who said that the New York Times article offered, quote, false hopelessness. And I think that that's an important point. So things are much better than they've ever been in the past. The armamentarium is large and growing. And for most people in our trial, 84% of people improved, our published trial. So there's every reason to believe that you can improve, but you've got to get in early. Don't wait. Don't put your head in the sand. That doesn't help for this problem. And work with a team that is experienced in getting good outcomes. And that this should not be a problem. I've been saying to people, there have been scourges throughout history. At one time, leprosy was the big thing everybody was worried about. When I was a little boy, the big thing everyone worried about was polio, because it would just strike, boom, you could have polio and wake up with paralysis. So now, the big one, the big scourge is Alzheimer's. And it's going to be a past scourge, and we're already beginning on that path. So please get it, get evaluated, and please don't worry. Things are going to be better, and it's going to continue to be better, year after year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I thank you for that message. I think, I'd also love to hear what kind of message would you send to the physicians out there, that like a clear message of Alzheimer's from your perspective, what you've seen, and maybe the physician who, isn't quite on board yet with your work. What would that be? What would that clear message be? Not just to maybe the physician, but the public in general.
Yeah, well, that we all took a Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. And the sad part is that people are putting people who are harmed onto some of these drugs, especially people who are ApoE44, where it's already been published that they do worse than nothing on some of these drugs. And yet doctors are recommending them. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's directly against the Hippocratic oath. If you've got something that is actually working better than anything in the past, please refer your patients. Please have compassion and use compassionate use, and send these to groups that are actually getting some good outcomes. And please consider being trained. There is ReCODE 2.0 training that's available. Over 2,000 physicians from 10 different countries and all over the United States have taken this training, and many of them are getting excellent results. And if you're not getting excellent results after that, work with a group that is. There's so much that can be done for so many people in need.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And, we didn't really get into it today, but you've got a phenomenal new book out, The Ageless Brain, that I want to mention, that this is kind of the next evolution of your work almost. It feels like sort of this proactive guide for people who are maybe not yet symptomatic. So I want to mention that. You've got also, of course, The End of Alzheimer's and The First Survivors of Alzheimer's as well. Phenomenal books. I've read all of them, and just really appreciate everything you're doing in the world and continuing to fight the good fight against it all, and helping people along the way in a massive way. So Dr. Bredesen, it's always such a pleasure and honor to speak with you. And I could talk to you for a long time, but I know you're a busy man. And I do want to mention, though, for those of you who are watching, we do have a live Q&A coming up with Dr. Bredesen, so we can maybe answer more of those questions that you have in a live Q&A on our medical education platform that's coming up September 4th at 9 a.m. PT. And it's going to be a really great opportunity to really connect with Dr. Bredesen and ask those burning questions, because I know I have many more that I could ask you. But thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Let's all make dementia a rare condition, just as it should be.
100%. I'm right there with you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Metabolic Link with Dr. Dale Bredesen. I hope you enjoyed that interview just as much as I did. I know I have, as I mentioned, many more questions for him. And the good news is that this world expert is coming on our medical education platform, the Metabolic Initiative, on September 4th for a live Q&A at 9 a.m. PT, 12 p.m. ET. You will not want to miss this. You can head on over to membership.metabolicinitiative.com/Bredesen to register. And it's free to join. You get a free 7-day trial, and you can also explore hundreds of other videos on metabolic health and therapy, from presentations from our conference to private podcast, ad-free episodes, you name it. It's a pretty incredible resource that you won't want to miss. So until next time, thank you guys so much for joining me for this interview with Dr. Dale Bredesen. I will see you soon.
Do you love learning about metabolic health? So do we. It's why we created the Metabolic Initiative, an online educational platform providing evidence-based education on metabolic health and therapies for healthcare professionals and the general public. By joining the Metabolic Initiative, you'll gain access to hundreds of expert lectures, interviews, panel discussions, and even private episodes of the Metabolic Link. CMEs are available. Go to metabolicinitiative.com to get started. And as always, thank you for listening to the Metabolic Link.